Canada finds itself on the edge of what could be one of the most significant trade confrontations in its modern history, a confrontation with ramifications that extend far beyond the balance sheets of provincial treasuries or the headlines of North American media. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The catalyst for this looming crisis is President-elect Donald Trump, whose repeated threats to impose sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods have forced Ottawa into uncharted territory, the open consideration of curtailing or even halting energy exports to the United States. For a country whose energy sector is one of the largest pillars of its economy, this is not merely a hypothetical, it is a decision that could reshape trade, politics, and energy security for years, if not decades, to come. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, after an intense and highly charged meeting with provincial and territorial leaders on Wednesday, issued a statement that underscored the gravity of the moment. Everything is on the table. This phrase was more than diplomatic language, it reflected the Trudeau government's acknowledgement of the extraordinary challenges posed by Trump's tariff threats and its recognition of Canada's unique leverage in the energy sector. For decades, Canadian energy exports to the United States, ranging from crude oil and natural gas to hydroelectric power and uranium, have formed a silent but critical backbone of bilateral trade. Today, these flows have moved from background infrastructure to center stage in a geopolitical and economic confrontation. Yet beneath the surface, profound tensions threaten Canada's ability to present a united front. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, whose province is the heart of Canada's oil production and whose economic health is directly tied to energy exports, refused to sign the joint communiqué that emerged from the meeting. In a pointed post on X, Smith criticized federal officials for publicly and privately entertaining the idea of curtailing energy exports or imposing tariffs on Alberta products. Until these threats cease, Alberta will not be able to fully support the federal government's plan in dealing with the threatened tariffs, she declared. Smith's remarks reflect a growing rift between federal authority and provincial autonomy, particularly when economic interests are on the line, and underscore the historical sense of Western alienation in Canadian politics, a divide that has deep roots stretching back decades. The economic stakes of any disruption in Canadian energy exports are staggering. Canada is the largest foreign supplier of energy to the United States, supplying roughly 60% of its crude oil imports. Beyond crude, Canada provides 98% of U.S. imported natural gas, 93% of imported electricity, and 28% of uranium. Any disruption would have immediate consequences for U.S. refineries, power grids, nuclear facilities, and downstream industries, while simultaneously threatening Canada's energy-producing provinces, particularly Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Quebec. The potential economic fallout includes reduced provincial revenues, job losses, decreased investment, and heightened fiscal pressures on governments already navigating the complexities of pandemic recovery, inflation, and climate transition policies. Trump's rationale for the tariffs revolves around border security and the flow of illegal drugs, particularly fentanyl, across the northern frontier. He has framed the tariffs as a corrective measure, insisting that Canada has not done enough to prevent fentanyl trafficking and irregular migration into the United States. Trudeau has countered by noting that less than 1% of fentanyl seizures and illegal border crossings occur at the Canadian border, highlighting the disproportionality of the threat. Nonetheless, Ottawa has moved forward with a $1.3 billion border security package, aimed at enhancing surveillance technology, increasing personnel, and improving cross-border coordination. This approach reflects Canada's dual strategy, signaling goodwill and cooperation while simultaneously preparing for potential economic conflict. The provinces most affected by potential energy retaliation have been vocal in expressing concerns. Alberta and Saskatchewan, whose economies are heavily dependent on energy exports, have warned that using energy as a bargaining chip could provoke a national unity crisis. These warnings are rooted in historical grievances and a perception that Ottawa has often prioritized the political interests of Eastern Canada over those of Western provinces. Smith and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe have called for a snap federal election, arguing that Trudeau lacks the mandate to negotiate on behalf of all Canadians. Trudeau, who resigned as Liberal Party leader earlier this month, is expected to remain Prime Minister only until March, adding a layer of political vulnerability to his position in these high-stakes negotiations. The tension between federal and provincial authorities has already manifested in public diplomacy. Smith traveled to Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Florida estate, last week and met privately with the president-elect twice. She delivered a stark warning. Tariffs are inevitable, and Ottawa must act decisively to protect Alberta's economic interests. Trudeau's government responded with criticism, accusing Smith of undermining national cohesion and placing provincial interests above national strategy. This confrontation underscores the fragility of Canada's negotiating position, highlighting the challenge of maintaining domestic unity while facing an assertive foreign power. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, whose province represents over $493 billion in annual trade with the United States, made a highly visual statement during Wednesday's meeting. Donning a bright blue hat reminiscent of Trump's MAGA cap and emblazoned with the slogan, "Canada is not for sale," Ford implored other provincial leaders to resist divisive tactics. "He's going to try to devastate our country. He's gonna try to divide our country, and we cannot have division," he warned. Ford's intervention emphasized that the stakes go beyond economic calculations, touching the core of Canadian political cohesion and identity at a moment when federal-provincial solidarity is essential. Other provincial leaders echoed Trudeau's position that all options, including leveraging energy exports, must remain open. Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey described energy as Canada's queen in this game of chess, highlighting its strategic importance. His province, which exports both oil and hydroelectric power to the United States, could become a decisive tool in Ottawa's response. Quebec Premier François Legault, meanwhile, published an op-ed in The Hill, appealing directly to U.S. lawmakers. He warned that tariffs on Canada and Mexico could reduce U.S. GDP by at least 1% in a single year, even before factoring in inflationary pressures. Quebec supplies 64% of the aluminum used by U.S. industries, meaning a 25% tariff would raise the cost of everyday goods, from beer cans to automobile parts to airplane components. Legault's warning illustrated the intricate interdependence of North American trade and the domestic consequences of tariffs on the United States itself. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce has reinforced these concerns, noting that widespread U.S. tariffs could push Canada into a recession by mid-year. Industries from automotive manufacturing to aerospace, agriculture, and high-tech manufacturing could face disruptions, layoffs, and increased costs. Canadian households, already grappling with rising inflation and cost of living pressures, would face additional economic uncertainty, creating a complex domestic political environment for Trudeau and future federal leaders to navigate. Historically, Canada-US trade relations have been marked by periods of intense negotiation, mutual dependency, and occasional conflict. From the softwood lumber disputes of the 1980s and 1990s to NAFTA renegotiations in recent years, Canada has repeatedly leveraged its strategic advantages to protect domestic industries while avoiding catastrophic escalation. Energy has historically been a stabilizing factor, but the current scenario, in which energy could become a direct bargaining tool, represents a profound departure from past practice. The Trudeau government's willingness to consider such measures underscores the extraordinary nature of Trump's threats and reflects the latent strategic power inherent in Canada's energy exports. Beyond domestic politics and bilateral trade, the global implications of a potential Canadian energy shutdown are significant. Oil and gas markets could experience short-term volatility, with price spikes reverberating across Asia, Europe, and Latin America. International investors would monitor Ottawa's decisions closely, weighing risks in Canadian energy infrastructure projects and broader investment in resource-based industries. For Canadian companies, diversification into alternative markets could accelerate, reshaping trade patterns and long-term economic strategy. Politically, Trudeau faces a delicate balancing act. He must manage competing pressures from provincial leaders, maintain national unity, assert federal authority, and navigate a leadership transition within the Liberal Party, all while negotiating with a U.S. administration known for unconventional and unpredictable tactics. Premiers like Smith and Moe are leveraging the crisis to assert influence, pressuring Ottawa for elections and threatening to withhold support if federal policies are deemed harmful to regional economies. Meanwhile, Trudeau must maintain credibility with the Canadian public, projecting strength, competence, and strategic foresight. Energy has thus emerged as both a weapon and a symbol. Historically a quiet backbone of Canada's economy, energy is now central to diplomacy, domestic politics, and the negotiation of international power. How Ottawa, the provinces, and the Trump administration navigate this complex web of economic interdependence and political calculation will shape Canada's economic trajectory, political cohesion, and strategic standing on